This is the Atari 8-bit podcast.
The first day, he pointed out my desk, and it was like a foot deep in submissions that they hadn't gotten to yet. So my first job was to go through all those submissions and find the stuff that looked interesting and see what we might want to buy for the magazine. At that point, on the masthead, I was listed as executive editor, and I was pretty much single-handedly producing both A.N.A.L.O.G and S.T.L.O.G.
This is an interview episode of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Clayton Walnum was writer and editor at A.N.A.L.O.G Computing and ST-Log magazines. He started out as a technical editor at A.N.A.L.O.G and eventually became executive editor of both magazines. Clayton wrote the C-manship column, an ongoing tutorial on the C programming language, as well as many, many other articles. This interview took place on November 8, 2015. In it, we talk about Lee Pappas, whom I previously interviewed.
So where should we start? Tell me the story before the story. How did you get into computers? When was the first time you played with an Atari? Kind of tell me some backstory.
Well, I started off, I guess it was in the early 80s with, I got a TRS-80, and I was fooling with it at home, and it had only 4K of memory. And I very quickly discovered I wasn't able to do much with it. Mm-hmm. And a friend of mine said, well, you know, why didn't you buy an Atari? It's the same price, and it's got 16K. So I returned the TRS-80 for a full refund and bought the Atari 400. Mm-hmm. And that's how I got into that, and I just kind of buried myself in programming. I just every waking moment I was working on the machine. So.
Yeah, what basic or machine language? Where'd you start? And
I started mostly with Atari Basic. I was it probably took a year or so before I was trying to write type in programs for magazines, and I had actually sold a kind of dice game to one of the lesser-known magazines. I can't even remember what its name is now, and they actually went out of business before it was even published. But then I kind of
high res, maybe. I'm trying to.
Maybe. I mean, I recognize the name high res. Mm-hmm. That would have been, I don't know, 84 maybe.
Mm-hmm. That's about right.
I'm not sure, 83, 84. And I had been writing a lot of programs and putting them on CompuServe, and I sent some stuff into A.N.A.L.O.G, which was the microcheck program. Mm-hmm. It was a home checking system. And I started talking with Charlie Bachand, who worked at A.N.A.L.O.G on CompuServe. And I don't remember how it came about, but the next thing you know, he was visiting me in my home in Connecticut. It's about an hour drive for him, and then they offered me a job, and I started working there. And
wow. So how old were you at the time, about?
Let's see, probably mid-30s, I guess.
Okay. So were you unemployed at the time, or did you quit some other job? Or?
No, I was working at an industrial X-ray lab that does aircraft parts, and looking for faults in castings and things like that. And I quit that job in order to go to A.N.A.L.O.G. I had been in college learning, for computer science, but I was still in school at the time. So
yeah,
I started late with college. Actually, I didn't start going to college till I was like 27.
All right. So all of a sudden, you're working for this magazine, which obviously you had already been a reader of, and
I was a huge fan. I mean, I couldn't wait for every issue to come out. It was just like, it's here. So yeah, it was kind of like, it was kind of weird even, it's kind of like, what am I doing here?
So what did they put you to work doing at the start?
Well, when I came in the first day, he pointed out my desk, and it was like a foot deep in submissions that they hadn't gotten to yet. So my first job was to go through all those submissions and find the stuff that looked interesting and see what we might want to buy for the magazine. And my title was technical editor, so it was my job to not only go through the submissions, but also to anything we accepted that was going to be printed in the magazine, I went through to make sure it was technically accurate and that sort of thing before it got passed on to Diane Goff for its final edit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was a fun job.
Can you remember any stories of things that were awesome or things that were terrible or just interesting things that came across your desk when you were doing that?
There were always people who stood out. Brian Chappelle, whenever I saw his name, I knew there was going to be something good in the package. David Plotkin, I don't know if you remember him.
Mm-hmm.
Matt Radcliffe. There were a lot of names that just kind of, as soon as they came in, you gave them immediate attention. But like any magazine, there's for every one thing you're interested in, there's probably 50 that you don't. So
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff was coming in at that time.
Okay, so you're sitting there, you're approving things, you're sending out contracts, sending stuff to Diane, and then what?
And then what? Well, then it would all they would take all those articles and they would typeset them and paste them up on. Used to be everything was manual then. They paste them up on boards and make a camera-ready copy and send them to the printer. And the end of that cycle, there would be a new magazine. So, and it was always a good day when the new issue came out. A little bit of a celebration, I guess.
Yeah.
Yep.
Nice. And you wrote a lot of stuff yourself, as well as you wrote a ton of stuff for the magazine.
Yeah. Part of my job was to kind of fill the holes in the magazine, maybe with ideas that we weren't getting from external sources, and I also got paid for extra for writing, so it added to my income. Mm-hmm. So there was incentive to do it that way too. So there was, especially when A.N.A.L.O.G came out. There were very few writers that were working on the ST. And I remember there was at least one issue where the table of contents was like, Clayton Walnum, Clayton Walnum, Clayton Walnum, Clayton Walnum. I wrote the whole issue myself, so. But yeah, it was what I enjoyed to do. I mean, I've been interested in writing since I was a young teenager. And then I had this interest with computers suddenly, and the two just kind of fit together really well, and they've served me well my whole life, so.
Awesome. So let's talk about some of the games and programs you wrote. I mean, any that stick out in your mind as your the ones that got the most attention, and there's Dragon Lord and Nightshade and Moon Lord and. Yeah.
Microcheck is probably the one that was most important to me because it was the one that was first accepted at A.N.A.L.O.G. I had originally been writing it for what was it called? The Atari Exchange, was that right?
Atari Program Exchange.
Yeah, it was kind of a contest. There was like a $10,000 prize or something.
Yeah.
And I had originally was working on it for that, but that Atari stopped doing that, and so I submitted that one to A.N.A.L.O.G. And but you're right. There were lots of games. Most of them I programmed at my desk there at A.N.A.L.O.G. There weren't too many I already had. The dice game was kind of like a Yahtzee clone, the one that I'd originally submitted to the magazine, but the magazine went out of business. And
Atari.
Atari, exactly.
Atari, yeah.
Yeah, and it didn't have that published until much later when we were actually the readership had gone down and submissions were going down, and we started needing stuff. And so I started pulling out some of this older stuff, but I think I might have even published that under a pseudonym. I don't remember. I used to use Clive King so that I wouldn't look like I was writing everything.
Nice. In the screenshot I'm looking at, it says Clayton Walnum's Atari Z, but
okay. That
could have been translated.
Yeah, there were a couple of programs that were in the magazine that were mine, but under the name Clive King. I can't remember which ones they were. I know there was a type-in, text adventure. That would have been towards, 1988 or 89.
There's one called, I'm looking at here, called Slave 2.
There you go.
Great.
Yeah. That was actually a series of text adventures. The first one I had written and put it up on CompuServe. And CompuServe was a whole lot of fun back then. I mean, there were it was the place to go to get programs and stuff, and you'd get a lot of feedback, especially from the people who ran the special interest group, the Atari there. They were always very thankful for anything you put up there and would test it. And so that's kind of how that series started. So that one had been kicking around, probably for 4 or 5 years. I didn't think at that point that those text adventures were maybe the highest quality of thing that should be an analog, but we were running out of stuff, so we kind of had to plug the holes where we could.
Yeah, it just readership was down at getting near the end, and people were moving the STs. And
I mean, I don't know. I don't really know exactly when numbers started falling. We kind of found out when it was close to when LFP was going to buy it. Mm-hmm. And at that point, I was the only member of the staff that followed Lee into LFP, but I stayed in Connecticut in a home office. Mm-hmm. So I mean, you kind of knew that it wasn't going to last forever. So Atari's numbers were really getting small.
Yeah. I misheard you. You after LFP bought it, you stayed or you did not stay?
I stayed working from a home office for, I don't know, a year and a half. At that point, on the masthead, I was listed as executive editor, and I was pretty much single-handedly producing both A.N.A.L.O.G and ST-Log, putting them together and sending them to LFP to be typeset and laid out.
Wow.
So I was the editorial department at that point. Lee was working with other things. Video games and computer entertainment was he was starting that magazine, and I worked with him on the very first issue of that. And in fact, I was listed as executive editor on that first issue as well. But because I wasn't willing to move to L.A., it got turned over to somebody else, Andy Eddy. I don't know if you remember him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that name.
He was someone that wrote a lot of stuff for A.N.A.L.O.G, but he was willing to move. So I think he ended up in Glendale. I don't know what he's doing now. We did. I did bring my wife out, and we did kind of consider it and look around. But I mean, the housing prices were, as you can imagine, in California, were ridiculous, and the pay that I was offered was not really any more than I was getting in Connecticut. So it just wasn't financially feasible. I don't know how Andy did it, but
so you're there at A.N.A.L.O.G, and then man, you must have felt just hung out to dry once you're the only other guy in the editorial department after Larry Flint took over.
Well, I mean, not really. I loved the job. I really, really wanted to keep it. I actually, in the interim between Massachusetts and L.A., I worked with Lee at his apartment for like a month with no pay. I mean, that's how much I wanted to keep this job. So, I mean, I was glad to take on the responsibility. It was the type of thing I wanted to do. So, probably one of the best times of my life, really. It was short, only maybe 3 years, but it really set me up for the other things I wanted to do afterwards. So, it worked out well all around.
So tell me a story. Tell me a story about working in the A.N.A.L.O.G office, and maybe you can something happen. Paint a picture for me about what it was like.
Yeah, one of the things that really sticks in my head, and it's kind of a funny story, I think, but it wasn't that funny at the time because it was really an important event. But Charlie Bachand had just gotten the Atari ST, and he had been the documentation for programmers was pretty slim. You pretty much got I think it was like a mimeographed book or something of function calls, but no real information about how they related to each other, and it was just very hazy. So Charlie was working on that, and I don't know how long. Maybe he worked on it for about a week, and suddenly he's like, "Oh, everybody, come over here! You got to see this! You got to see this!" And we came running over, and he had a line on the monitor. He had figured out how to draw a line. And it was like, wow, that's just amazing. Of course, now with the graphics you have, drawing a line doesn't seem like a big deal, but to figure that out from the hazy documentation was pretty impressive. So, we're running over there expecting to see, at least Pong, but he had a line. So, yeah. Charlie was a very talented guy, very nice guy, too. He was probably the person I was closest to at A.N.A.L.O.G.
Is he still around? I haven't heard that name much in my research.
I haven't. I've searched for him like on Facebook and things like that. Even Google, and he just, I don't know. I guess he just kind of went his own way. He was very close friends with Diane Gaw, so I would suspect that she knows where he is and what he's doing. But
you weren't the easiest person to find either.
Well,
I saw that you have all these books that you've written, and then, I don't know, you just weren't easy to find.
I actually, to be honest with you, I did receive some of your earlier requests, and I really wasn't sure that I wanted to do an interview. I don't really know why, but your persistence impressed me, so here I am.
Well,
in fact, I actually got a letter from you the other day asking for an interview. After I had already talked to you on Facebook.
Okay, yeah, the letter took a while.
Yeah.
But sometimes I'm like, this might be the guy on Facebook. It could be a different Clayton, and then here's an address. It's probably right. It's in the right.
Yeah. Well,
state,
I'm probably the only Clayton Walnum in the country, but you never know.
Yeah.
I know my parents used to say if somebody has the last name Walnum, they are certainly a relative. So.
So and then after A.N.A.L.O.G folded, well, tell me about the end before we move on to what happened next.
We were just working as usual, and then there were some. I think they had called in an advisor of some sort or a lawyer for just advice and stuff like that. And the work environment really changed. I mean, it became very regimented, where it used to be very informal. Then suddenly they wanted to account for every minute, and I don't really blame them, but they were struggling to continue putting out this magazine with a falling subscription base. So there were a few meetings, and then the whole thing with LFP came up, which was kind of a relief because I think, well, for me anyway, nobody else was really followed through with it, but at least it meant the magazine was going to continue for a while. I didn't think it would last very long, but I knew it would last for a while. And then there was meetings at LFP. I remember meeting with the president at LFP and working out salary and things like that, and he wanted me to move to L.A. It's a good I didn't, because it didn't last, and maybe I would have ended up continuing with video games and entertainment, but that would have been only a few years too. I mean, I'm not sure. I don't really know Andy Eddy's how his career path went after he took over video games and computer entertainment, but I think I made the best choice. So I traveled out to LA a couple of times, went to the offices there at LFP, but for the most part I worked over the phone, and I had a fax machine, and I would send the information to all the articles and stuff to them, and they typeset them and fax the whole magazine back to me, and I'd proof it and fax it back to them. It was kind of a bulky way to work, but it worked for a while.
Wow.
But yeah, once it had gone from the A.N.A.L.O.G offices in Massachusetts to LFP, it was obviously very different because I was working alone in a home office. It was just, it wasn't the same. I mean, we were a pretty close group at the offices in Massachusetts. So. Yeah.
And then when A.N.A.L.O.G shut down, and then ST-Log went for a while, and then you wrote the final editorial and the final issue of ST-Log saying, okay, we're done. Yeah.
Wow, I don't even remember that. Yeah, I know I've got all the issues around somewhere in the basement. I actually thought I knew where they were. I was looking yesterday, and they weren't where I thought. So I was like, well, I'm not going to dig through the whole basement. I may even have an Atari computer stashed somewhere. I just don't know anymore. you get all these boxes when you move, and they go down to the basement, and you never look at them. So, but yeah, I don't even remember that. That makes me a little sad.
That was October 1989.
Yeah, those were the days. You know, a little cliched for you.
Yeah. Well, they were the days.
Yep.
And then after you kept on writing, after ST-Log and A.N.A.L.O.G, you wrote all sorts of books about more modern machines, right?
Yeah. Well, what happened was after A.N.A.L.O.G and ST-Log stopped, there were still video games and computer entertainment, and I was still, even though Andy had taken it over, I was still very much involved in it. And so what I did at that time was I started doing strategy articles for the magazine where I would play entire games onto a videotape. And then you remember those maps that you used to get for video games?
Yeah.
I used to take a picture of every screen in the game and paste them all together into these long maps and send them to the magazine at LFP. So I started doing that. And that led to, I guess Andy, I don't remember how it exactly came about. I think Andy had interest in a book on Nintendo, but he needed a co-author. So I wrote that first book with him. It was Beyond the Nintendo Masters. And then that just led to other publishing opportunities. I remember, again, I'm not sure how I got on the phone with him, but there was one of the editors at, was it Wiley? I was looking for work as, as a freelancer, and he was like, well, we could really use a book on C++, Borland C++, tips and tricks. And I was like, oh, yeah, no problem. I can get that to you. I didn't know a thing about C++. I didn't know anything about Borland. But, I learned it, and that was my first published PC book. I had self-published I don't know if you remember the C-manship articles.
Yes.
Those we collected. In fact, I worked with Brian Chappell. He laid them out and was kind of in charge of the production of it. He lived in Wisconsin, and I was in Connecticut. But and there was assembly language workshop, and then there were several smaller books like AES programming and VDI programming or something like that. And we would hawk them at computer shows and so on. So, but yeah, it led to a lot of books on PC programming and other topics too. I'm a musician. I wrote some books on home studio recording. A book on artificial life. It was. I think I spent like 15 years writing freelance, and I wrote like 60 books. I was writing like 3 or 4 a year.
Incredible.
Yeah, I was fortunate to be one of the few freelance writers that could actually make a living at it. So, most freelancers have a full-time job and they have to spend their evenings writing. So,
right.
Yeah.
I did the same. I was writing for computer magazines, not so many books, but a few. But computer magazines started in '92 and did that for 13 or 14 years until 46.
Yeah. I didn't actually get bored with it, but I can't tell you exactly for sure what happened, but I think a lot of programming at the time was going overseas. The computer book market went through a big shakeup, and suddenly all the editors I had worked with had moved on, and there was all these strange young people who didn't know who I was and didn't really care. And I don't mean who I was like I was important, but that I was experienced with that company for writing books. And it wasn't so much about the information anymore. It was more about the name on the book. I remember that one of the people I was working with or trying to work with, they wanted a book on songwriting, and I said, I can put that together for you. But, they wanted someone like Paul Simon to write a foreword for it. I'm like, are you serious, Paul Simon? It's like, you really think Paul Simon's going to write a foreword for my book? But that's what they were going after, and if you didn't have those kind of contacts, you were pretty much done. The book business is that. It's a business. They're in to sell books, and they don't really, that's the bottom line. How they get there is not really an issue.
Right.
But, yeah, as for writing now, I work at a CAD-CAM company as senior technical writer, writing manuals for the software. I don't know if you ever heard of a program called Mastercam.
No.
It's it lets you design parts on a CAD CAD side of the software, and then you can send it to the computer controlled machines that will cut the part. It sends the code to the machine that actually will create the part, on the machine. So it's pretty sophisticated stuff, and I've been there for like 10 years now. I do a little programming there. I write utilities and stuff for the department, but for the most part, I was teaching programming for a while at the local community college, but that's kind of slowed down. That was kind of fun. But as for actual, writing for magazines or things like that, no, I don't do that anymore.
It doesn't sound like you break out the Atari, because maybe it's in the basement somewhere. So
yeah, well, what I did do a couple of years ago maybe was find some of these Atari emulators, and start looking at some of the stuff from way back when, and that was kind of fun. I remember bringing up the ST screen and being kind of shocked at how plain it was. I remembered it to be much more than it is, but of course now we're used to photographic quality, user interfaces. So, but that's about it. Yeah, if I have a machine, I think I remember taking out probably the ST. I had a 60 meg hard drive, maybe 15 years ago, and it still worked. But I can't imagine that I would have done anything with it, so I think I still have it, but I'd have to go through a lot of boxes in the basement to find it. And it'd be a miracle it still worked. I mean, after that, but you never know. Yeah. I had all the excuse me?
I was going to say, if you find any old discs and you need help getting the data off it, I can do it, or I know people who can do it for the ST. So. Oh,
cool. Yeah, I was going to say I did. I had all the 5 1/4 inch discs from A.N.A.L.O.G and all that stuff. Like I said, I can't imagine throwing it out. But after talking about A.N.A.L.O.G and stuff, I probably will do some searching and see what I can come up with, because it's been a while since I've really paid it much mind. Really, it's just it's so long ago. I mean, it's like 30 years.
Yeah, about that.
Yeah.
All right. So if you could send a message to the people who read A.N.A.L.O.G back in the day, who are now listening to this interview, and you can send them a message right now, what would you tell them?
I just give them a big thank you for being there, for creating that audience, and appreciating my work and letting me do what I did. It was just such a great time. Computers were so much more fun then than they are now. There's so many technologies and stuff now that it kind of just, you can't really know everything. It used to be with the Atari, you could program, if you're experienced, you could just program it off the top of your head. You didn't need a stack of manuals a mile high, Now you just can't do that with computers anymore. You have to have tons of reference materials, and there's dozens of different kinds of libraries, and it's just, it's much more work than it used to be. So if it's too much work, then it stops being a lot of fun, So
yeah.
All I can say is that I think a lot of people, and if actually Lee and Mike used to joke about how people would think that A.N.A.L.O.G was like this big corporate thing in this huge office building, where it was really like 8 people in a small building who put this thing out every month. And I think they'd probably be surprised how informal it was, and how uncorporate-like. Even though it was incorporated, it was very uncorporate-like. So it was a great atmosphere to work in.
I think I have what I need. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thanks for your interest and for continuing to pursue me.
Thanks for allowing yourself to be found.
All right, well, thank you.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.